The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Catherine's kitchen window, casting delicate patterns across the worn wooden table where she sat with her untouched cup of coffee. Steam rose from the ceramic mug, a gift from her daughter Sarah years ago that read "World's Best Mom" in faded blue letters. Catherine's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the phone, the weight of the conversation she needed to have pressing down on her shoulders like a heavy winter coat. At 62, Catherine had always been the rock of her family. She was the one who held everyone together during her husband Michael's heart surgery 5 years ago, the one who flew across the country when her elderly mother broke her hip, and the one who never missed a single soccer game or school play for her 3 children. Her auburn hair, now streaked with silver, was always perfectly styled, and her warm brown eyes had a way of making everyone feel heard and loved. But, today, those same eyes were red-rimmed from sleepless nights and filled with tears she refused to let fall. The diagnosis had come 3 weeks ago, delivered in Dr. Harrison's sterile office with its motivational posters and fake plants. Breast cancer, stage 2, aggressive but treatable. The words had hit her like a physical blow, making her feel as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. She remembered gripping Michael's hand so tightly that her wedding ring left marks on his palm, while the doctor's voice seemed to come from underwater, explaining treatment options and survival rates that all blurred together into meaningless numbers. Since that day, Catherine had been living in a strange bubble of normalcy and terror. She continued her daily routines, making breakfast for Michael before he left for work at the accounting firm, watering her beloved garden that she had spent decades nurturing, and attending her weekly book club meetings where she smiled and nodded at all the right moments. But, underneath the surface, she felt like she was drowning, each day bringing her closer to a reality she wasn't ready to face. The hardest part wasn't the fear of treatment or even the fear of death. It was the thought of telling her children. Sarah, 28 and pregnant with her first child, was already stressed about becoming a new mother. Her son David, 25, was in the middle of his medical residency, working 18-hour days and barely finding time to sleep. And her youngest, Emma, was just 22 and, in her final year of college, worried about job interviews and her upcoming graduation. How could she burden them with this when they all had so much on their plates? Catherine stood up from the kitchen table, her joints protesting slightly as they always did in the morning now. She walked to the window and looked out at her garden, where the last of the autumn flowers were clinging to life despite the approaching winter. The roses she had planted when they first moved into this house 30 years ago were dormant now, their stems bare and waiting for spring. She wondered if she would see them bloom again, then immediately pushed the thought away. Dr. Harrison had said the prognosis was good if they caught it early and started treatment soon. She had to hold on to that hope. The sound of Michael's car pulling into the driveway broke through her thoughts. He was home early from work again, something that had become increasingly common since the diagnosis. Her husband of 35 years had always been a man of few words, but his love showed in actions rather than speeches. He had been holding her every night as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, his steady breathing and warm presence the only things that kept her anxiety at bay. "Kath?" Michael's voice called from the front door. "You in the kitchen?" "Here," she called back, quickly wiping her eyes and forcing a smile onto her face. It was a practiced expression now, one she had perfected over the past 3 weeks. Michael appeared in the doorway, his salt and pepper hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it, a habit he had when he was worried. At 64, he was still the same gentleman she had fallen in love with in college. The worry lines now creased his forehead and his blue eyes held a sadness that hadn't been there a month ago. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, crossing the kitchen to wrap his arms around her. She leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of his aftershave and the slight smell of coffee that always clung to his clothes. "Better," she lied, because it was easier than admitting that every morning brought a fresh wave of terror that took her breath away. Michael pulled back to study her face, and she knew he could see through her facade. After 35 years of marriage, they had long since stopped believing each other's polite lies. "The kids need to know, Kath," he said quietly. "Sarah called me at work today. She wants to come for Christmas, and she's excited to tell us about the baby's nursery. David sent a text saying he might be able to get Christmas Eve off. And Emma is planning to bring her boyfriend home to meet us." Catherine's heart clenched at the mention of Christmas. It was still 6 weeks away, but it had always been her favorite time of year. She was the one who decorated every room of the house, who spent days baking cookies and preparing elaborate meals, who made sure everyone felt the magic of the season. The thought of going through the holidays with this secret hanging over her head felt unbearable, but the thought of ruining everyone's Christmas with her news felt even worse. "I know," she whispered, closing her eyes. "I just don't know how." Michael's hands cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize had started falling. "We'll figure it out together. But they love you, and they have a right to know what's happening. You can't protect them from everything forever." She knew he was right. Catherine had spent her entire adult life trying to shield her children from pain and disappointment, but this was something she couldn't fix with a homemade meal or a gentle word of encouragement. This was real and scary and completely out of her control, and that terrified her more than the cancer itself. The afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls to the oncologist's office and insurance companies, the mundane bureaucracy of serious illness that no one ever talks about. Catherine found herself sitting at the kitchen table again as the sun began to set, surrounded by pamphlets about chemotherapy and radiation, appointment cards and prescription information that made her head spin. Michael was in his study, talking quietly on the phone with his brother Tom, one of the few people they had told about the diagnosis. She could hear the low murmur of his voice through the walls, and she was grateful that he had someone to talk to about his own fears. She had been so focused on holding herself together that she sometimes forgot that this was happening to him too, that watching the person you love face cancer was its own kind of hell. The phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. Sarah's name appeared on the caller ID, and Catherine's heart skipped a beat. Her daughter's voice was bright and excited when she answered. "Mom! I'm so glad I caught you. I wanted to tell you about the doctor's appointment today. The baby is doing great, and we found out the gender." Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious, and, for a moment, Catherine felt a genuine smile spread across her face. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news. What are you having?" "A girl. Can you believe it? Richard is over the moon. He keeps saying she's going to be Daddy's little princess." Sarah laughed, the sound filling Catherine with both joy and heartbreak. "We've been talking about names. I was thinking maybe Catherine, after you. What do you think?" The words hit Catherine like a physical blow, and she had to grip the edge of the table to keep herself steady. The thought of a granddaughter carrying her name, of a little girl she might not live to see grow up, was almost too much to bear. "Mom? Are you there?" Sarah's voice was concerned now. "Yes, honey. I'm here. That's a beautiful name. I'm honored." Catherine's voice cracked slightly, and she cleared her throat, hoping Sarah wouldn't notice. "Are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just a little tired. It's been a long day." The lie came easier now, though it tasted bitter in her mouth. They talked for a few more minutes about nursery themes and baby clothes, with Catherine making all the appropriate excited grandmother noises while her heart broke a little more with each word. When they finally hung up, she sat in the gathering darkness of her kitchen and wept for the first time since the diagnosis, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she was facing. Michael found her there an hour later, still sitting at the table with tears streaming down her face. He didn't say anything, just pulled a chair close to hers and held her while she sobbed out all the fear and grief she had been holding inside. "She wants to name the baby Catherine," she whispered against his shoulder. "What if I'm not here to meet her?" "Don't talk like that," Michael said fiercely, his own voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Harrison said the treatment has a very high success rate. You're going to be here to meet your granddaughter, and you're going to spoil her rotten just like you did with all our kids." Catherine wanted to believe him, but the statistics and survival rates that she had been obsessively researching online painted a more complicated picture. Even with successful treatment, there were no guarantees. Cancer was unpredictable and cruel, and it didn't care about Christmas plans or unborn granddaughters or gardens waiting for spring. That night, Catherine lay in bed listening to Michael's steady breathing beside her, but sleep remained elusive. She found herself thinking about all the things she wanted to say to her children, all the memories she wanted to make sure they held onto, all the love she wanted to pour into whatever time she had left. The thought of Christmas approaching filled her with both dread and determination. Maybe this would be their last Christmas together as a complete family. If that was the case, she was going to make it perfect, even if it killed her. She thought about Sarah's excitement about the baby, about David's dedication to his medical career, about Emma's bright future stretching out ahead of her. They were all so young, so full of life and possibility. How could she tell them that their mother, the woman who had always been their safe harbor in every storm, was facing the fight of her life? As the night wore on, Catherine made a decision. She would wait until Christmas to tell them. She would give them one more perfect holiday, one more memory of their family intact and happy. It might be selfish, but she needed those 6 weeks to figure out how to be brave enough for what was coming. She needed time to find the words that would break their hearts as gently as possible. But, first, she needed to start treatment. Tomorrow, she would call Dr. Harrison's office and schedule the surgery that would begin this journey. Tonight, she would lie here next to the man who had loved her through everything and try to memorize the feeling of being whole, of being the person she had always been before cancer changed everything. Outside her bedroom window, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering her sleeping garden in a blanket of white. Winter was coming whether she was ready for it or not, but, somewhere beneath the frozen ground, her roses were waiting patiently for spring. Catherine closed her eyes and held on to that image, using it as a prayer and a promise that she would find a way to bloom again, no matter what the next few months would bring. The hospital corridors smelled like disinfectant and fear, a combination that Catherine had grown accustomed to over the past 4 weeks. Her surgery had been scheduled for the Monday after Thanksgiving, and now, 2 weeks later, she was sitting in the oncology wing waiting for her first chemotherapy treatment. The mastectomy had gone better than expected, according to Dr. Harrison, though the physical recovery had been more challenging than anyone had prepared her for. Michael sat beside her in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his hand resting gently on her knee. He had taken leave from work to be with her through the treatments, despite her protests that he didn't need to sacrifice his vacation days for her medical appointments. But he had been firm about it, in the quiet, stubborn way that had characterized their entire marriage. He would be there for every treatment, every doctor's appointment, every moment when she needed someone to lean on. Catherine Mitchell? A young nurse with kind eyes and purple scrubs appeared in the waiting room doorway. "We're ready for you." The chemotherapy suite was nothing like Catherine had imagined. Instead of the sterile, frightening room she had pictured, it looked more like a comfortable living room with large windows that let in natural light. Reclining chairs were arranged in a semicircle, and soft music played in the background. Other patients were settled into their chairs, some reading books, others dozing, a few chatting quietly with family members or nurses. Catherine was led to a chair near the window, where she could see the hospital's small garden. Even in December, there were evergreen shrubs and winter flowers that provided splashes of color against the gray landscape. She found it comforting to have something beautiful to look at during what promised to be a difficult few hours. The nurse, whose name tag read Jennifer, was probably around Emma's age, with a gentle manner that immediately put Catherine at ease. "Is this your first time?" she asked as she prepared the 4-line. Catherine nodded, trying not to look at the bag of medication that would soon be flowing into her veins. She had read about the side effects, the nausea and fatigue and hair loss, but reading about it and actually facing it were two very different things. "I know it's scary," Jennifer said, her voice soft and reassuring. "But you're going to do great. We'll take good care of you, and your husband seems like excellent support. That makes a huge difference." As the medication began its slow drip into her system, Catherine felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. This was it, the beginning of the fight for her life. There was no more waiting, no more uncertainty about when treatment would start. She was finally doing something active to battle the cancer that had invaded her body. Michael had brought a thermos of her favorite tea and a book of crossword puzzles, knowing that the treatment would take several hours. He also had his laptop, planning to catch up on some work emails, but Catherine suspected he would spend most of the time watching her for any signs of discomfort or distress. "How are you feeling?" he asked after the first 30 minutes had passed without incident. "Okay, actually. Better than I expected." Catherine was surprised to realize it was true. She had been so worked up about this first treatment, imagining all the ways it might go wrong, but so far it felt like nothing more than sitting in a comfortable chair with an 4 in her arm. Jennifer checked on her every 15 minutes, monitoring her vital signs and asking about any symptoms. The other patients in the room had become a source of unexpected comfort. There was Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who was knitting what appeared to be a baby blanket while receiving her treatment, and Tom, a man about David's age who was working on his laptop between naps. They all seemed so normal, so much like regular people going about their daily lives despite battling serious illnesses. Around noon, Catherine began to feel slightly nauseous, a sensation that Jennifer had warned her might happen. She was given additional medication to help with the side effects, and, within an hour, she felt better again. The whole experience was far less dramatic than she had anticipated, though she knew the real effects of the chemotherapy would likely become apparent over the next few days. "You're handling this like a champ," Jennifer said as the treatment neared its end. "Some people have a much harder time with their first round." Catherine smiled, feeling a small surge of pride. Maybe she was stronger than she had given herself credit for. Maybe she could get through this with more grace than she had feared. The drive home was quiet, with Catherine feeling tired but not terrible. Michael kept glancing at her as he drove, clearly worried about how she was handling everything. She reached over and took his hand, squeezing it gently to let him know she was okay. When they arrived home, the house felt different somehow. It was the same place she had lived for 30 years, with the same furniture and family photos and comfortable familiarity, but now it was also the place where she would recover from chemotherapy. It was where she would face whatever side effects came with fighting for her life. The first sign that something was changing came 2 days later. Catherine woke up feeling more tired than she ever remembered being, as if someone had drained all the energy from her body overnight. Getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, and even simple tasks like making coffee required enormous effort. Michael had gone to the grocery store, and Catherine found herself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. She had promised herself she would wait until Christmas to tell the children about her diagnosis, but that was still 2 weeks away. Sarah had called 3 times in the past week, excited about Christmas plans and the baby's progress, and each conversation had become more difficult for Catherine to navigate. David had also called, mentioning that he might be able to get both Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off, which would be the first time in 2 years that he had been home for the entire holiday. His excitement about spending time with the family made Catherine's heart ache with guilt. She was keeping this enormous secret from him, and it felt like a betrayal of the close relationship they had always shared. Emma was the most frequent caller, chatting about her final semester classes and her boyfriend Mark, whom she was clearly head over heels for. She was planning to bring him home for Christmas, nervous but excited about introducing him to the family. Catherine had always been the person Emma turned to for advice about boys and school and life decisions, and keeping this secret felt like failing her youngest daughter when she needed her most. The fatigue was overwhelming, but Catherine forced herself to her feet and walked to the living room, where the Christmas decorations were still packed away in boxes in the closet. She had always started decorating the weekend after Thanksgiving, transforming the house into a winter wonderland that made everyone feel the magic of the season. This year, the decorations had remained untouched, and, with less than 2 weeks until Christmas, she was running out of time. She opened the first box and pulled out the stockings she had hand-sewn when the children were small, each one embroidered with their names and decorated with felt snowflakes and candy canes. Sarah's was pink and white, David's was blue and silver, and Emma's was green and gold. There was also one for Michael, more simply decorated but made with the same love and attention to detail. As she held the stockings, Catherine felt tears welling up in her eyes. Would this be the last Christmas she would hang them on the mantel? Would she be here next year to see Emma graduate from college, to hold Sarah's baby daughter, to watch David become the doctor she knew he would be? The front door opened, and Michael called out that he was home. Catherine quickly wiped her eyes and called back to him, not wanting him to find her crying over Christmas stockings. He had enough to worry about without seeing her fall apart every time she thought about the future. "I picked up some of that ginger tea you like," Michael said as he came into the living room, his arms full of grocery bags. "Jennifer said it might help with any nausea you might experience." He stopped when he saw the stockings spread out on the coffee table. "Oh, are you starting to decorate?" Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. "I thought I should get started. The kids will be home soon." Michael set down the groceries and sat beside her on the couch, picking up David's stocking and running his fingers over the careful embroidery. "Do you remember when you made these? You stayed up until almost midnight every night for a week, working on them by hand." David was about 5, Emma was 3, and Sarah was 8. She kept trying to help, but she wasn't old enough to use the needles safely. Catherine smiled at the memory. "You told me I was crazy to make them by hand when I could buy them at the store. And you told me that store-bought stockings didn't have love sewn into them." Michael's voice was soft with memory. "You were right, as usual." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of Christmases past. Catherine remembered those early years when money was tight and they couldn't afford elaborate gifts, but she had made sure the house was filled with homemade decorations and the smell of cookies baking. The children never seemed to notice that their presents weren't expensive. They were too caught up in the magic of the season that she had worked so hard to create. "I need to tell them," Catherine said suddenly, the words coming out before she had consciously decided to say them. Michael looked at her, his expression careful and hopeful. "Are you sure?" "No," she admitted. "I'm terrified. But I can't keep pretending everything is normal. It's not fair to them, and it's not fair to us. They need to know what's happening before they come home for Christmas." Michael reached over and took her hand, intertwining their fingers in the gesture that had comforted her through 35 years of marriage. "How do you want to do it?" Catherine thought about it for a moment. The idea of having the same conversation 3 times, of breaking each of her children's hearts individually, seemed unbearable. But the thought of calling them all at once felt cold and impersonal. "I think I should tell Sarah first," she said finally. "She's the oldest, and she's going through so much with the pregnancy. She deserves to hear it directly from me, not from one of her siblings. Then David, and then Emma." Michael nodded. "Do you want me to be with you when you call them?" "Yes," Catherine said without hesitation. She couldn't imagine having those conversations without him beside her. "But I need to be the one to tell them. This is something they need to hear from their mother." The rest of the day passed in a haze of nervous energy and careful planning. Catherine wrote down what she wanted to say to each of her children, practicing the words until they didn't make her cry anymore. She wanted to be strong for them, to reassure them that she was going to fight this and that the prognosis was good. She didn't want them to see her fall apart. That evening, as she and Michael sat down to dinner, Catherine felt a strange sense of peace. The decision was made, and tomorrow she would begin the difficult process of sharing her burden with the people she loved most in the world. It would be hard, but it would also be a relief to stop pretending that everything was normal. "I love you," Michael said suddenly, looking at her across the dinner table with an intensity that took her breath away. "I love you too," she replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge in their 35 years together. Outside, snow was falling again, and Catherine thought about her garden sleeping under its white blanket. In a few months, when winter finally loosened its grip, new life would push through the soil, reaching toward the sun with stubborn determination. She would be like those flowers, she decided. She would fight her way back to the light, no matter how dark the winter became. Tomorrow, she would begin the hardest conversations of her life. But tonight, she would sit with her husband and watch the snow fall, storing up this moment of peace to carry her through whatever storms lay ahead. The morning arrived with a crystalline clarity that made everything outside look fragile and beautiful, like the world had been encased in glass overnight. Catherine stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun reflect off the snow-covered yard, and felt her resolve solidify. Today was the day she would tell her children about the cancer. Today, the careful facade she had maintained for weeks would finally come to an end. She had barely slept, her mind racing through different versions of the conversations she was about to have. How do you tell your pregnant daughter that you might not be there to see her baby born? How do you explain to your son, who has dedicated his life to healing others, that you have a disease he can't fix. How do you break your youngest child's heart with news that will change everything she thought she knew about her family's future? Michael was already downstairs making coffee, and she could hear him moving around the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone trying not to wake a sleeping house. But Catherine had been awake since 4 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and rehearsing words that would never feel right no matter how many times she practiced them. She showered and dressed carefully, choosing the blue sweater that Sarah had given her for her birthday last year and the pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. If she was going to have the most difficult conversations of her life, she wanted to look like herself, like the strong, capable mother her children had always known her to be. Downstairs, Michael handed her a cup of coffee without speaking, his eyes searching her face for any sign that she might have changed her mind about today's plan. But Catherine's expression was calm and determined, even though her hands were trembling slightly as she accepted the warm mug. "Sarah first," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll call her in an hour, after she's had time to get the kids ready for school." Michael nodded, settling into the chair beside her at the kitchen table. They had been married long enough that words weren't always necessary. He understood the weight of what she was about to do, and his presence alone was enough to give her the strength she needed. At exactly 9 o'clock, Catherine dialed Sarah's number, her heart pounding so hard she was sure Michael could hear it across the table. The phone rang twice before Sarah's cheerful voice answered. "Hi, Mom." "Perfect timing, I just got back from dropping the kids off at daycare and I was about to call you. I have the most adorable story about Emma's reaction to finding out she's going to have a little sister." Catherine closed her eyes, steeling herself for what came next. "Sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something important. Is Richard there with you?" "No, he's at work." "Why?" "Mom, you sound serious. Is everything okay?" The concern in Sarah's voice was immediate and sharp. "I want you to sit down, honey. What I have to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but I need you to know that everything is going to be okay." There was a pause, and Catherine could hear Sarah moving around, probably settling onto the couch in her living room that Catherine had helped her pick out when she and Richard first bought their house. "I'm sitting." "Mom, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" Catherine took a deep breath, her prepared words suddenly feeling inadequate and clumsy. 3 weeks ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. I've already had surgery, and I started chemotherapy this week. The doctors say the prognosis is very good, and we caught it early." The silence on the other end of the line seemed to stretch forever. Catherine could hear her daughter breathing, but no words came. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small and broken. "Mom? Did you just say cancer?" "Yes, sweetheart. I know it's scary, and I know it's a lot to process. But I want you to know that I'm fighting this, and I have an excellent medical team, and Dad is taking wonderful care of me." "How long have you known?" Sarah's voice was stronger now, but Catherine could hear the tears underneath the words. "About a month. I wanted to tell you sooner, but you're dealing with so much with the pregnancy, and I needed time to understand what we were facing before I worried you." "Worried me?" Sarah's voice rose in pitch. "Mom, I'm your daughter. I should have been worried. I should have known. How could you keep this from me for a month?" The pain in Sarah's voice cut through Catherine like a knife. This was exactly what she had been afraid of, not just the grief and fear, but the sense of betrayal that came with being kept in the dark about something so important. "I was trying to protect you, honey. You're pregnant, and you have your own health to worry about. I didn't want to add this stress to everything you're already dealing with." "Protect me?" Sarah was crying now, Catherine could hear it in her voice. "Mom, I'm 28 years old. I'm married, I have children of my own. You can't protect me from this. You can't just decide what I can and can't handle." Catherine felt her own tears starting, but she forced her voice to remain calm. "You're right. I'm sorry. I made the wrong choice, and I'm sorry." They talked for another 30 minutes, with Sarah asking detailed questions about the diagnosis, the treatment plan, and the prognosis. Catherine was grateful for her daughter's practical nature,
the way she channeled her fear into a need for information and understanding.
By the end of the conversation, Sarah had calmed down somewhat, though Catherine could still hear the underlying panic in her voice.
"I'm coming home this weekend," Sarah announced. "I need to see you, and we need to talk about how I can help."
"Sarah, you don't need to." "Yes, I do.
And don't you dare try to tell me I shouldn't travel or that it's not good for the baby. I need to see my mother, and that baby needs her grandmother to get better."
After they hung up, Catherine sat at the kitchen table and wept, not just from the pain of breaking Sarah's heart, but from relief that the first conversation was over. Michael held her while she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances that she had done the right thing. The call to David was scheduled for lunchtime, when he would have a break between his hospital rounds. Catherine had always been amazed by her son's ability to compartmentalize, to switch between his emotional life and his professional responsibilities with practiced ease. She hoped that skill would serve him well today. David answered his phone with the slightly distracted tone of someone who was thinking about 3 different things at once.
"Hi, Mom.
I only have about 10 minutes before my next patient, but I'm glad you called. I wanted to tell you that I definitely got Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off. I'll be home for the whole weekend."
"David, I need to tell you something important. Can you find somewhere private to talk?"
The tone of her voice must have alerted him that this wasn't a casual conversation, because his next words were sharp and focused.
"Hold on. Let me find an empty room."
Catherine waited, hearing the sounds of the hospital in the background, footsteps, muffled conversations, the beeping of medical equipment that had probably become white noise to her son after 3 years of residency.
"Okay, I'm alone. What's going on, Mom?"
Catherine delivered the news more directly this time, having learned from her conversation with Sarah that there was no gentle way to share devastating information. David listened in complete silence, his medical training evident in the precise questions he asked about her diagnosis, staging, and treatment protocol. "Who's your oncologist?" he asked, his voice clinical and controlled.
"Dr. Harrison at Regional Medical Center." "Good. He's excellent.
I've heard very good things about him from some of the attendings here."
"What about your surgical team?"
They talked for 20 minutes about medical details, with David asking the kinds of questions that only someone with his training would think to ask.
Catherine was grateful for his clinical approach, even though she could hear the fear underneath his professional demeanor.
"I should have been there," he said finally, his carefully maintained control starting to crack. "I should have been with you for the surgery, for the first chemo treatment.
I'm your son, and I'm a doctor. I should have been there to help you understand what was happening. Honey, you have your own responsibilities.
Your patients need you, and your residency is too important to interrupt for something like this."
"Something like this?"
David's voice was incredulous.
"Mom, this is cancer. This is my mother having cancer. There is nothing more important than this."
Catherine could hear him struggling to maintain his composure, and her heart broke for him. David had always been the most serious of her children, the one who felt responsible for everyone and everything around him. She knew he would blame himself for not knowing, for not being there, for not somehow preventing this from happening.
"I need to look at your treatment plan," he said, his voice steadying again as he shifted back into medical mode.
"I want to review everything with a few of the oncology attendings here, make sure you're getting the best possible care."
"David, Dr. Harrison is an excellent doctor.
We've done our research."
"I know, but I need to do this, Mom. I need to feel like I'm helping somehow. Please let me do this."
Catherine agreed, understanding that reviewing her medical records was David's way of processing his fear and feeling like he had some control over an uncontrollable situation. They talked about his plan to drive home for Christmas, and Catherine promised to have copies of all her medical records ready for him to review.
The call to Emma was the hardest.
At 22, Emma was still young enough to believe that parents were invincible, that bad things happened to other families but never to hers. She was also the most emotionally open of Catherine's children, the one who felt everything deeply and had never learned to hide her feelings behind practical concerns or professional detachment. Emma was in her dorm room when Catherine called, probably studying for finals or working on one of the senior projects that would determine whether she graduated with honors. Her voice was bright and distracted when she answered the phone.
Hey, Mom.
I can't talk long because I have a paper due tomorrow that I'm nowhere near finished with, but I wanted to ask you about Christmas dinner.
Mark is a vegetarian, and I was wondering if you could maybe make that mushroom roast you used to make when Sarah went through her vegetarian phase?
Catherine's heart clenched at the casual normalcy of the request, at the assumption that Christmas would proceed exactly as it always had, with her in the kitchen creating the perfect holiday meal for her family.
Emma, sweetheart, I need to talk to you about something very important. Can you stop what you're doing and really listen to me? Mom, I'm really stressed about this paper. Can we talk tonight? Or tomorrow? No, honey. This can't wait. Please put down whatever you're working on and listen to me.
Something in Catherine's tone must have broken through Emma's distraction, because the next time she spoke, her voice was alert and concerned.
Mom, what's wrong? You sound really serious.
Catherine closed her eyes and spoke the words that would change her youngest daughter's world forever.
I've been diagnosed with breast cancer.
I had surgery 2 weeks ago, and I started chemotherapy this week.
The silence that followed was different from Sarah's shocked pause or David's clinical processing.
This was the silence of a young woman whose fundamental understanding of the world had just been shattered. No, Emma said finally, her voice small and broken.
No, Mom. That can't be right.
You're healthy. You take care of yourself.
You take care of everyone. You can't have cancer.
I know it's hard to understand, sweetheart.
It was hard for me to understand too.
But it's true, and I wanted you to know because I love you and because I don't want you to worry about things you're hearing in bits and pieces from other people.
Are you going to die?
The question came out as barely a whisper, but it hit Catherine with the force of a physical blow.
No, honey.
The doctors say the prognosis is very good. I'm going to fight this, and I'm going to get better. But it's going to be a difficult few months, and I wanted you to know what was happening. Emma began to cry then, deep, heartbroken sobs that made Catherine wish she could reach through the phone and hold her daughter. She let Emma cry, making soft, soothing sounds and waiting for the first wave of grief to pass.
I want to come home, Emma said when she could speak again. I want to come home right now.
Sweetheart, you have finals next week, and you're so close to graduation.
You can't leave school now.
I don't care about school. I don't care about finals.
I care about you. I want to be with you.
Catherine spent the next 20 minutes convincing Emma to stay at school and finish her semester, promising that she would be fine for the next 2 weeks and that Emma could come home for Christmas as planned. It was one of the hardest conversations she had ever had, trying to be strong and reassuring while her own heart was breaking for her daughter's pain. By the time she finished talking to Emma, Catherine was emotionally exhausted. The 3 conversations had taken nearly 4 hours, and she felt drained of every ounce of energy she possessed. But there was also a profound sense of relief. The secret was out, the burden was shared, and she no longer had to pretend that everything was normal. Michael made her lunch, which she picked at without much appetite, and then she spent the afternoon fielding follow-up calls from all 3 children.
Sarah called back to discuss travel arrangements and to ask more detailed questions about the treatment.
David called to clarify several medical details and to let her know he had already started researching her oncologist's credentials. Emma called twice, just to hear her voice and to make sure she was really okay. By evening, Catherine was sitting in her living room surrounded by Christmas decorations that she had finally found the energy to unpack. The stockings were hung on the mantel, the tree was decorated with 30 years' worth of ornaments that told the story of their family, and the house was beginning to look like the Christmas wonderland her children expected to find when they came home.
How do you feel? Michael asked, settling beside her on the couch with 2 cups of tea.
Tired, Catherine admitted. But also lighter somehow.
Like I've been carrying this enormous weight and I finally got to put it down.
They're all going to be okay, Michael said, his voice gentle but confident. They're strong kids, and they love you. This is going to bring the family closer together, not tear it apart.
Catherine hoped he was right.
The next few months would be challenging for all of them, but at least now they could face those challenges together, as a family united in fighting for her life. The conversations were over, the truth was out, and Christmas was less than 2 weeks away. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, with love and hope and the stubborn determination that had always defined their family. Outside, snow continued to fall, but Catherine no longer saw it as an ending. Instead, she saw it as the promise of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild their family's story with honesty and courage at its center.
The hardest part was over.
Now came the real work of healing, together. Christmas Eve morning dawned crisp and bright, with fresh snow covering the ground like a pristine white blanket. Catherine woke earlier than usual, not from anxiety this time, but from excitement. Her children were coming home today, and, for the first time since her diagnosis, she felt genuinely happy about something other than a successful medical treatment. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of activity and emotion. True to her word, Sarah had arrived the weekend after their phone conversation, 6 months pregnant and fiercely determined to take care of her mother. She had spent 3 days organizing Catherine's medications, researching nutrition during chemotherapy, and creating detailed schedules for appointments and treatments. Her practical nature had been a blessing, turning the chaos of cancer treatment into manageable, organized steps. David had called every other day, sometimes with questions from oncology specialists he had consulted at his hospital, sometimes just to check in and hear his mother's voice. He had reviewed every aspect of her treatment plan with the thoroughness of someone who trusted medicine but needed to verify everything personally when it came to someone he loved. Emma had been the most emotional of the three, calling daily and sending care packages filled with homemade cookies, funny cards, and small gifts designed to brighten her mother's spirits. She had also sent a beautiful silk scarf that she claimed would look elegant when Catherine lost her hair, a gesture of love and acceptance that had moved Catherine to tears. Now, as Catherine stood in her kitchen making coffee and watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered yard in shades of pink and gold, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Yes, she had cancer. Yes, the next few months would be difficult. But her family knew the truth now, and they were facing it together with a strength and unity that surprised even her. Michael appeared in the doorway, already dressed despite the early hour. He had been unable to sleep too, his excitement about having all 3 children home for Christmas evident in the way he had been humming Christmas carols while he shaved and the care with which he had chosen his clothes. Sarah's flight lands at 10, David should be here by noon, and Emma said she'd be home by 2, he recited, checking the schedule they had written on the refrigerator 3 times already that week. I know, Catherine smiled, handing him a cup of coffee. You've been counting down the hours like a child waiting for Santa Claus. I feel like one, Michael admitted, settling beside her at the kitchen table. It's been so long since we had everyone home at the same time. And, after everything that's happened. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Catherine understood. This Christmas felt precious in a way that previous ones hadn't, weighted with significance that came from uncertainty about how many more they might have together. But, rather than feeling morbid, that knowledge made every moment feel more valuable, more worth savoring. The house was ready for them. Catherine had spent the past week preparing with an energy that surprised everyone, including her doctors. Despite the fatigue from chemotherapy, she had insisted on cooking most of their traditional Christmas foods herself, only allowing Michael and Sarah to help with the heaviest lifting. The refrigerator was full of homemade casseroles and desserts, the guest rooms were prepared with fresh sheets and extra blankets, and wrapped presents were arranged under the tree with the same careful attention to detail she had always brought to Christmas morning. At exactly 10:30, they heard a car pulling into the driveway. Through the front window, Catherine could see Sarah emerging from a taxi, her pregnancy now obvious beneath her winter coat. Richard was with her, carrying their luggage and looking around at the house where he had spent so many holidays over the past 5 years since he and Sarah had been married. Catherine opened the front door before they could knock, and Sarah immediately dropped her purse and wrapped her mother in a careful but fierce hug, mindful of the surgical site that was still healing but determined to convey the depth of her love and relief at being home. "You look good, Mom," Sarah said, pulling back to study her mother's face. "Better than I expected." The wonders of good concealer and determination, Catherine laughed, though she was pleased that the effort she had put into her appearance that morning was paying off. She had learned to use makeup to counteract the pallor that came with chemotherapy, and she had chosen her clothes carefully to hide the weight loss that was beginning to become noticeable. Richard hugged her next, his embrace warm but gentle. He was a kind man who had become like a son to Catherine over the years, and she could see in his eyes the same concern and determination she had seen in her children. This battle wasn't just hers anymore, it belonged to all of them. David arrived just as they were finishing lunch, his car pulling up as they were clearing the dishes from the kitchen table. Catherine felt her heart swell as she watched her son emerge from his old Honda, looking tired from the long drive but smiling as he saw the Christmas decorations visible through the front windows. At 25, David had grown into a man who combined his father's steady reliability with Catherine's emotional depth, though he tried to hide the latter behind his medical training and professional demeanor. But Catherine could see through that facade to the boy who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms and who had cried when his pet goldfish died when he was 7. "There's my doctor," Catherine said as David walked through the front door, shaking snow off his coat and grinning at the warmth and brightness of the house. "I'm not a doctor yet," David corrected, but he was pleased by the recognition. He hugged his mother carefully, and Catherine could feel him mentally cataloging her appearance, her energy level, any signs of how the treatment was affecting her. "You look strong," he said after studying her face for a moment. "How are you feeling? Any nausea from the last treatment? Fatigue? Changes in appetite?" "David," Sarah interrupted, laughing. "She's our mother, not your patient." "I know, but I'm fine, honey," Catherine assured him. "Tired, but good. Much better than I expected to feel at this point." They spent the afternoon together in the living room, catching up on the details of their lives that didn't translate well over phone calls. Sarah talked about the baby's progress and her preparations for becoming a mother. David shared stories from his residency, the challenging cases he was learning to handle and the mentors who were shaping him into the doctor he was becoming. They carefully avoided talking about Catherine's illness, as if by mutual agreement they wanted to save that conversation for when Emma arrived and they could address everything as a complete family. Emma's arrival at 2 o'clock was announced by the sound of her laughter echoing from the driveway before she even reached the front door. She had brought Mark, the boyfriend she had been dating for 8 months and whom she clearly adored. He was a quiet young man with kind eyes and an easy smile, and Catherine could see immediately why Emma had fallen for him. But it was Emma herself who took Catherine's breath away. Her youngest daughter had always been beautiful, but there was something different about her now, a maturity and strength that hadn't been there during their devastating phone conversation 2 weeks earlier. She had clearly spent the past 2 weeks processing her mother's diagnosis and had arrived home ready to face whatever came next with courage and love. "Mom," Emma said simply, walking straight to Catherine and holding her for a long moment. "I'm so glad to be home." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." That evening, after Mark had been introduced to everyone and had charmed them all with his quiet humor and obvious devotion to Emma, the family gathered in the living room for their traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Catherine had insisted on cooking, despite everyone's protests, and the table was laden with all their favorite foods, her famous prime rib, roasted vegetables from her garden that she had preserved in the freezer, homemade rolls that filled the house with the scent of yeast and butter, and the green bean casserole that only Emma actually liked but that Catherine made every year anyway because it was tradition. They ate by candlelight, with Christmas music playing softly in the background and snow falling gently outside the dining room windows. The conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic, touching on Sarah's pregnancy, David's hospital stories, Emma's final semester classes, and Michael's retirement plans. For stretches of time, Catherine could almost forget about the cancer entirely, lost in the familiar rhythm of family dinner conversation. But, after dessert, as they moved back to the living room with coffee and hot chocolate, Catherine knew it was time for the conversation they had all been carefully avoiding. Her family needed to understand not just what was happening to her medically, but how she wanted them to handle the months ahead. "I want to talk about the elephant in the room," Catherine said, settling into her favorite armchair with her coffee cup cradled in her hands. "About my cancer, and what it means for all of us." The room grew quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, frightened silence she had feared. Instead, it felt like the respectful attention of people who were ready to face a difficult topic together. First, I want you to know how sorry I am that I kept this from you for so long. I thought I was protecting you, but I realize now that I was really just protecting myself from having to face how scared I was. Mom, you don't need to apologize, David said quietly. We understand why you waited. Maybe, but I want you to know that from now on, I'm going to be completely honest with all of you about how I'm feeling, what the treatments are like, and what the doctors are telling me. No more trying to protect anyone from the truth. Catherine looked around the room at her family, these people who were the center of her universe, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost took her breath away. The doctors say my prognosis is very good, she continued. The surgery went well, the cancer hadn't spread to my lymph nodes, and I'm responding well to chemotherapy. But, I won't lie to you, this is going to be hard. I'm going to lose my hair, I'm going to be tired and sometimes sick from the treatments, and there are going to be days when I don't feel like myself. We'll take care of you, Emma said fiercely. All of us. Whatever you need. I know you will, and I'm grateful for that. But, I also want you to keep living your lives. Sarah, I want you to focus on your pregnancy and preparing for your daughter. David, I want you to finish your residency and become the amazing doctor I know you're going to be. Emma, I want you to graduate and start your career and be happy with Mark. How can we just keep living normal lives when you're fighting cancer? Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. Because that's what gives my fight meaning, Catherine replied. I'm not just fighting for my life, I'm fighting for more time with all of you, for the chance to see Sarah's daughter grow up, to see David save lives as a doctor, to see Emma build the beautiful future she's working toward. If you put your lives on hold for my illness, then the cancer wins even if I beat it. They talked for another 2 hours, with Catherine answering their questions about her treatment schedule, her side effects, and her plans for the months ahead. David shared what he had learned from consulting with oncologists at his hospital, all of which confirmed that she was receiving excellent care. Sarah talked about her concerns about traveling back home while pregnant, and they made plans for her to stay in regular contact with Catherine's medical team. Emma made them all promise to call her if anything changed, even if it meant interrupting her classes. As the evening wound down and everyone began preparing for bed, Catherine felt a deep sense of peace. The conversation she had been dreading for weeks was over, and, instead of being traumatic, it had been healing. Her family understood what they were facing, they were committed to supporting each other through it, and they were going to face the future together with honesty and love. Later that night, as Catherine lay in bed next to Michael listening to the sounds of their house filled with children again, she realized that this might actually be one of the best Christmases they had ever had. Not because anything about their circumstances was ideal, but because they had discovered that their love for each other was strong enough to handle even something as frightening as cancer. How are you feeling? Michael asked quietly, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Grateful, Catherine answered, and meant it completely. Scared, but grateful. We're so lucky to have them. They're lucky to have you too. Did you see the way Emma looked at you tonight? And Sarah? They're not seeing someone who's sick, they're seeing their mother, who's fighting for her life and handling it with more grace than anyone could expect. Catherine smiled in the darkness, thinking about her children sleeping in their childhood bedrooms, about Sarah's unborn daughter who would carry her name, about David's gentle hands that would heal so many people, about Emma's bright future stretching out ahead of her. Tomorrow was Christmas, and they would exchange gifts and eat too much food and laugh together as a family. The cancer would still be there, the treatments would continue, and there would still be difficult days ahead. But tonight, Catherine fell asleep surrounded by love and filled with hope, knowing that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Her family was whole, her secret was shared, and Christmas had brought them exactly what they all needed most, the gift of being together, honest and unafraid, ready to fight for their future as a family united in love.